This is the Reality Check, presented by the SAP News Network. Here's your host, John Lieberman.
Welcome to Reality Check. I'm John Lieberman. So good to have you all here. This is a show about bringing together top minds from all over the world to discuss the hot button issues of the day. I can't tell you how excited I am with the group we've assembled today to tackle this issue of climate change. Let's bring them in now. Dr. Celine Hawaya, she's the PwC Global Climate Change Leader, joining us from London. Good to see you, Doctor.
Hi, nice to see you.
Dr. Richard Munang, joining us from Nairobi, Kenya. He is the Africa Regional Climate Change Coordinator at the UN Environment Program. It's so great to see you, Doctor. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for having me, John.
And our friend Mike Berry, Strategic Advisor and the Director at Mike Berry Co., a sustainable business consulting company. Mike, it's nice to see you.
And you, John, and thanks for reminding me that I never wrote my PhD up to be a doctor with the other two.
You are a doctor, right?
Could have been, should have been, but wasn't.
We often see headlines about climate change, and we often, see these warnings from groups like the Red Cross. Listen, the world should react with the same urgency to climate change as it is to the coronavirus crisis. Global warming poses an even greater threat than COVID. Celine, starting with you, your reaction.
Both are systemic shocks, right? We knew a pandemic would be coming at some point. We absolutely know climate change is around the corner. It is absolutely fundamental. I mean, what we have to do to solve for climate change, unfortunately, is much more complex and just as urgent. We have to kind of halve global emissions in the next 10 years, which means radically transforming every sector of our global economy in the next 10 years, 2 business cycles. So yeah, very complex and very urgent.
Richard, your thoughts on the Red Cross comment?
Actually, the changing climate is no longer an abstract issue. It's moved a long-distance issue into the present. And in October 2020, the United in Science report unequivocally pointed to the fact that climate change has not stopped for COVID-19. And it then means if nothing is done, then definitely the world is going to move towards an apocalypse.
Mike, let me bring you in. Let me ask you this. We often see these warnings from groups like the Red Cross, but I don't know globally that we see the kind of outrage or push that something needs to be done now in quite the way that we do about other issues. Why don't we see it more?
Because it's always been about something that's going to happen in the future, 5, 10, 15 years from now. It's somebody else's problem. I think what we've seen in the last 12 months is this devastating impact of wild weather events around the world. From the Arctic, California, Brazil, wildfires, devastating hurricanes in the Atlantic, flooding across the southern US, across Europe, right away across the Indian subcontinent. I mean, here in the UK, we have the wettest ever February and the driest ever May in the space of 3 months. So suddenly this is becoming real to people. And when you look at customer research or citizen research around the world about their feelings about climate change, it's utterly driven by their experience of it. And as more and more people are experiencing it, they're getting worried, they're getting angry, they're demanding change.
How does this issue of climate change and sustainability and all of this, how does it become more than just a buzzword for companies who must lead the way across the world?
Well, let me give you three practical examples. I mean, first from the British retail sector. In the middle of the pandemic, with a devastating impact on retail, 63 British retailers have come together and said, we have to get to net zero for scope 1 and 2, their own operations, lorries, shops, offices, and scope 3, these vast global supply chains and consumer use of the billions of products they sell by 2040, 10 years ahead of what any government wants. So retailers are stepping forward, but they're doing it together because no one can tackle this on their own. The systemic issues they face in terms of heavy goods vehicles, deforestation, food waste cannot be solved together. The second example is NatWest, the bank, who've said that they're going to disclose their scope 3 financial institutions doing it. And my final example is Unilever, who surprisingly uses 1 million tons of oil every year in billions of home care products it sells around the world. That oil has to come out to be replaced by alternatives, low carbon alternatives. That's €1 billion R&D mission that they're on to deliver that by 2030. So wherever we look, big business is making big commitments for change.
So how can technology and innovation push us forward here, Celine?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think Mike gave some great examples in terms of how big companies are committing to change, right? It's actually, I think today it's something like 320 big global companies are committed to net zero. And just under half of total global assets under management, the investors there are committing to decarbonize their portfolios. So stuff is happening. But what happens when these companies commit to net zero? Well, probably the first kind of 5-10 years of that decarbonization journey is possible with stuff that we have available at the moment, right? But actually some of the more difficult, challenging things, you know, if you're in the concrete and building sector, you know, there's an absolute core focus around how you think about new materials for concrete, recycled concrete that can even pull CO2 out of the atmosphere. If you're in the energy sector, right, a lot of the innovation has to happen in energy around moving to the 3Ds grid, so away from a centralized grid towards a decentralized, digitized, and decarbonized grid. And to do that, I mean, the good news is we're in the middle of the fastest period of innovation ever, the fourth industrial revolution, AI, you know, machine learning, blockchain, quantum, advanced computing, cloud, advanced materials, biosynthetics, and this full suite of technologies is actually coming together to help solve some of these harder challenges.
Richard, I want to bring you back in. I have two questions for you. The first one being, what can we learn from what you've been able to spearhead in Africa? What can the rest of the world learn from what's being done in that part of the world?
Yeah, I think John, Mike, and Selena put it very excellently. The reality is this: if you look at climate change, the fact that it's been considered a distant issue have made people sometimes disenfranchised. I'm not really worried about what to do. But actually, climate change is a disguised opportunity, because if you look at the opportunities that are hidden under the changing climate, especially across the entire African continent, we have a continent that is losing food worth $48 billion US. So if I start from the food agro value chain, 48 billion being lost, the only way to reverse those post-harvest losses is to tap into clean technologies. And what the young people are doing, they are being guided to develop solar dryers from local material that is actually 200% cheaper than imported solutions. And that is helping mothers in villages dry their vegetables, dry their tomatoes, dry their food crops, and this is putting more money in their pockets. The second aspect that we are seeing is that if you look at a continent that have 620 million citizens energy impoverished, leveraging from the 365 days of sunshine, people can then be able to get access to electricity in villages, tapping into solar energy that can then be able to go down to areas that have never ever seen electricity in their life. But that is not enough. Also tapping into that to be able to add value to what is produced, create more income streams, create more opportunities, and also jobs for the youth. And the third aspect that we are saying is that if you look at climate action as an investment opportunity, not just as a silo environmental obligation, it then demystifies the narrative that climate change is actually just for those who are environmentally driven, or it's something for the environment ministry rather than something for everyone. So the demystification of the narrative from climate change being a social issue or just a silo issue to a business investment opportunity, building on the practical examples that I've given of developing solar dryers, of turning waste to briquettes, or turning waste to biofertilizers, gives a different dimension that people can actually create businesses leveraging on climate action solutions. And that narrative have not actually become part of the mainstream. And that needs to actually become part of the mainstream as we speak.
And Richard, in a second, I want to dig even deeper on that, the idea of sustainability and profitability. But something that you said really got in my brain, and that is, what I'm hearing you say is that some of the best innovation is coming from the bottom up. It's coming from the communities. It's coming from the young people. It's not necessarily all starting from the top down and these big companies that are pushing things down, but it's more of this bottoms up approach there in Africa. Is that a correct assessment?
Absolutely, very correct. And this stems from the fact that the challenges have not actually been met for quite a very long time to be seen as disguised opportunities, as I said earlier. And when you look at what the young people are doing, they are very creative, they are very entrepreneurial, and at the same time, they're energetic. And what they have been missing is just guidance in a way that drives them towards leveraging climate action solutions. Climate change is a business opportunity for you to solve a community problem and at the same time put more money in your pockets. And they have been tapping into that. And as a result of that, one aspect that has been coming out very clear is that when people know that they are going to benefit from an action, they embrace it.
Fascinating. It's an issue of survival. I mean, it's fascinating. Celine and Mike, I want to bring you back in and kind of switch gears a little bit, back to this idea of sustainability and profitability. How do sustainability and profitability coexist?
I'll give you two quick examples. The first is building on the point we just had from Richard about entrepreneurs. We did a piece of work looking actually at the startup ecosystem for startups trying to solve for climate. So not just the traditional look at clean tech and energy, but much more broadly built environment, ag tech, heavy manufacturing, etc. And we actually saw when we looked at the last 8 years of startup data, investing into those startups globally, we've seen a rate of, it's 86 per year compound annual growth rate, right? So just to put that into context for the whole of the VC industry as a whole, that's 5 times the average rate of growth and 3 times the rate of growth we see in the AI sector at a time when investment into AI startups massively uptick. So there is a real value creation, a value opportunity there that's starting to be realized for entrepreneurs who are creating very commercially scalable businesses that are also helping to solve for climate. And we see the first generation of climate tech unicorns. On the other side, just quickly as a second point, more broadly, value creation and climate change. I mean, and this is something we now build in when we do work on deals advisories for mergers and acquisitions, right? When we support companies and thinking really in that kind of hard nuts way around how you create value. And the simple point is for a lot of companies, with the liabilities coming in from the change of legislation, you actually have a balance sheet impact on your balance sheet if you assume a carbon price of $100 per ton by the end of this decade, that's really going to hit home hard on higher emitting companies because of those regulatory changes. And on the positive side, you have a real value creation opportunity for putting out new products and services in the market that help on the transformation. So businesses are really actually now starting to think about it. It's a boardroom issue. It's an issue for the CFO. It's an issue for the chief strategy officer, not the CSR department anymore.
So Mike, I've heard great examples. How do we get more businesses to take notice? Because I feel like we're getting good examples, but we need more quantity. Your thoughts?
Well, John, I mean, the old paradigm was a few very public brands wanted to avoid a fallout with The Guardian or with Greenpeace and therefore did something voluntarily. They could also extract some cost savings from cutting energy use, for example, fuel use, great. That was version 1.0. Version 2.0, that is basic survival. If you're cut off from capital because your investors now expect it of you, if national governments around the world are legally decarbonising their economy and you're not keeping up, you'll be out of business. But most importantly of all, the products and services you sell have to have low carbon at the heart of them. 10 years ago, the coal industry sat there smugly and looked at wind and solar and thought it'll never take off. It's expensive, it's intermittent. Now it's being destroyed. The car industry 3 years ago was sat there complacent, laughing at Tesla. Now it's being destroyed. The same with the meat industry, complacent looking at plant-based and laboratory-grown alternatives. The same with the fast fashion industry, thinking it's still about buy it once, wear it once and throw it away. It's now about resale platforms. So every sector in the world is being systemically disrupted by sustainability in general, low carbon in particular. If you're not embracing it as part of your business model that you offer to your customers in the future, you're gone.
Celine, what keeps you up at night in terms of climate change and, worst case scenarios?
Well, what keeps me happy before I go to bed is the action we're starting to see out in the real economy. What keeps me up actually is the doctor bit is that I'm actually a climate scientist. I did a NASA fellowship before I joined PwC, or many years before I came into the private sector. And the science keeps me up, and specifically the science of positive feedback loops in the system. We know a lot about the physical feedback loops, so things like sea ice, albedo, clouds, things like that, and the positive feedback they have. We know very little in terms of biophysical feedback loops. So the 10 years that we have, that scientists think we have until we reach this threshold of 1.5 degrees of potentially dangerous global warming, if you exceed that, right, it might not actually be 10 years. That might actually be liberal, right? Because there are biophysical feedback loops, including, Amazon getting to the point of no return in terms of loss of the Amazon rainforest, and then potential dieback in terms of warmer temperatures, slowing down the carbon dioxide removal potential of plants and phytoplankton, in terms of big methane clathrates underneath the permafrost in the Arctic. So we don't actually know about all of that in a lot of detail yet. And the 10 years we think we have before 1.5 might actually be less.
Mike, how do we get this message to everyday people across the world? Maybe people in between the ones Richard described about the bottom-up approach and almost needing to innovate to survive, between there and kind of the richest companies in the world. How do we reach that whole middle segment of the world?
So, John, GlobScan just done a survey of 27,000 citizens across the planet asking if they care about climate change. The great news is 90% said this is important. When they were asked, but should we act on COVID first or climate first? In the developing world that's suffering the most, just look what's happening in Central America with the latest superpowered hurricane hitting it. People said, absolutely, it's about climate change. I'm suffering today. In the rich Western world, a little bit more complacency. It's climate change. I sort of see it a little bit. As California burns, southern US floods, as we try and get food from the UK food system against drought and flood at the same time, people here start to think, wow, climate change, we need to act. So that's the first point. The second point is the solutions we offer to them have to be better than the previous solution for them as well as planet.
So many lessons learned here. As we wrap up, I just want to go around and ask you each, what did we miss in this conversation? What else do we need to touch on? Richard?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the aspect of making climate action as an investment opportunity, using the lessons that have already been learned, and actually driving the case that good climate policy is good economic policy, as Mike have said, is very, very crucial, because the reality, as I said earlier, is climate change or climate action has been made as a silo environment discourse sometimes, and that become part of the mainstream. I think just lastly, building on what Celine has also said, is if you look at what keeps people awake at night, generally across the continent today, is to put food on the table, is to send their kids to school. It's about economics, it's about socio-economic opportunities. And if any solution that doesn't take, if solutions don't take that dimension, we might be in this for quite a very long haul in convincing people about taking climate action.
So Celine, on what Richard just said, how much of this is about messaging and maybe getting away from, some of the vernacular of global climate change and making it just more relevant to people's everyday lives? How much of it is about that, Celine?
I think for consumers and for voters, absolutely, and they're clearly two hugely powerful levers. I think business leaders is a different question, and then it becomes back to, okay, how is it really relevant to the bottom line, right? And that's clearly the focus there. And I think in terms of the bottom line, the more that we get regulatory changes coming in that kind of support that, the more that helps to push structural changes in the economy, that helps to push things in the right direction. And I think when we've had those changes come in recently, that's where we've seen an uptick of investors going, okay, I can see how this now impacts my balance sheet if we have a carbon tax of this coming in. So I think we haven't touched on governments too much, but governments are actually have a critical role to play in structurally changing some of the
was a moment that our mother told us we should never be ashamed of our situation, but we should always give our best in whatever thing we do. And she told me, give your best in school, because that's the only way you can salvage this challenge that we face and the difficulties we go through. Why am I bringing this up? Where we come from do not impede us if we know and believe that it is us to drive transformation. And that takes me to a very important aspect. We complain a lot and we blame. But the point I am bringing this up is that the challenges we see, the climate change challenges we see, food insecurity, lack of accessible clean fuels to replace charcoal, those challenges will not just by themselves solve themselves. They will need transformational thinking and innovative thinking to be able to turn those challenges into opportunities. Agricultural waste into fuel briquettes. That's innovation, that's transformation on its own. Simple solar dryers to reduce post-harvest losses costing the continent every year $48 billion and putting more money. If we are reduced this, if we can reverse this, we'll put more money in more pockets and put on the table. It therefore means when we refuse to change, that's not transformation. When we sit back and only complain rather than adding some effort to our talents to create skills and use those skills to turn a challenge into an opportunity which creates value, that's not transformation. When we don't do that, to become transformational agents that we need. And this needs us to have some faith. A faith is a belief in the invisible. Faith is a belief in impossibilities, because even in the word impossible, I am possible is there. And if we can believe and start doing what we can do and build on it, we will start to bring transformational development. Because in these times in which we are, these are not ordinary times, they're extraordinary times. From COVID-19, we saw the impact in the kitchen tables and in pockets, businesses closing down, opportunities limited for millions. To climate change, the elephant in the room that is reshaping contours of the continent, plunging millions into suffering, crop failure, floodings, drought, we name it. These are realities and they are no longer any abstraction, they are with us today. It means the thinking of transformation needs to be one that is premised on soft aspects, on our attitudes, on values of kindness and selflessness, so that we can spur hopefulness and not hopelessness, or we can spur collectivism and not individualism, and so we can spur selflessness and not selfishness. Transformation is not about where we come from. It's about seeing differently, knowing that we can inspire you to focus in the agro value chain, not only thinking about if I have land I can produce. Why do you need land for when a continent is losing post-harvest losses worth $48 billion? That's the problem. That's the problem. Why do you need land for when there is a gap, a market gap to replace charcoal, which is worth $20 billion in the continent? Learn a skill to turn waste to fuel briquettes and tap into this $20 billion. That's transformational thinking that we need to drive climate actionpreneurship in the continent. And that transformation needs you to start thinking different. It needs you to rethink differently and become the one you need. Because for quite too long, we've spent time complaining and whining, blaming others. But except for our own selves, you must start by blaming yourself. Look straight in the mirror and ask yourself, what am I useful for? By then, you start to notice the potential in you is immense. The ability that you can actually be able to unleash can inspire others. So the first person to look up to is you. And that looking up is to answer a simple question. What can I do to turn a challenge into an opportunity? And how can I usher myself to become a climate actionpreneurship actor across the entire African continent? Start today and become a solution provider, and more so, a climate action solution provider. Thank you.
By names of Kasenga Amos. Metal fabricator. Right now here what you can see, this is a briquette making machine. So as you can see, these are the outcomes of this briquette making machine. As you can see them, these are briquettes made out of what? Clay, basically mixed with the clay then and other substances. So mainly today I'm here to talk about this briquette making machine. This briquette machine here, it has a compactor. This is our compactor, as you can see. So whereby it compacts the briquettes from inside here, as you can see. So after compacting our briquette from inside here, then we have this handle. This is our handle for this briquette making machine. This handle helps in the pulling up of the briquettes out of our mold, which is inside here. Then this handle is also helped by our stepper. This is the stepper.
My name is David Uganda, and today we have come to conduct a briquettes training in Gomba County. Some of the groups we have trained, they are very saving and good associations. We have sourced these trainers from over 7 groups, and what you see behind me, we are still making the briquettes using the machines which are fabricated by the youth. This is a systems approach whereby we enable these groups to get cassava cuttings of over 40 acres, and some of the groups planted them and they have come out very well, as you see, and also drying them using cassava, using the solar dryer, using the solar dryer, and after that we have trained them on via addition using the cassava dried from the solar dryer, and also using the raw materials from the cassava, which are peelings and also other flour, to make the briquettes. So we have trained a number of over 40 today in briquettes making, and they are ready to, some of them are ready to take the machines to see how these machines function, and also make small company, or so they can start getting some income in order to increase their saving. The other reasons for this is to improve their livelihoods, increase on their saving, and also make sure that they stop using the firewood and the charcoal, and also turn to using briquettes. Because briquettes are smoke-free, they are quick at burning, they take long, over 4 hours, and we have tried out on their sigit, which is a charcoal stove, to boil the porridge, which is used and water, and also boil the beans to see the longevity of the briquettes, which are made by Bafosa Uganda and Africa Farmers Media Center. Thanks for this group, and we are collaborating with CBS Peusa Cooperative, and that's why we are in this Village Saving Allowance Association, trying to make income generating activities for them, and one of them the briquettes, which are trained the urban groups, and for the rural groups we go into value additions and also EBA, which is ecosystem-based adaptation approaches, so that they can increase on their savings. Thank you very much.
Secretary Peter, Technical Advisor, Bafosa Uganda. We are still here at Gomba, training this is our last training, and we are training briquettes. This is our 3rd day in Gomba. Right now we are training 7 groups. And each group has got 2 participants who are here in the training. For the activities we have trained them, each activity they have picked interest, and they will continue promoting these activities. I'm sure, because they have picked interest in whatever we have trained them. The machines are fabricated at the higher academy. We have the youth, we have 4 youth who are training other youth to make these machines, but the machines are fabricated at the higher academy. We have always promoted the youth to see that they are part of the Bafosa group, when also that they are doing some innovative volunteerism work. So we have these youth who are making these briquettes at the higher academy for the Bafosa Uganda. Gomba, here we have 7 groups, and they have picked some few. Each group has picked some few participants which are here. Then the other groups, there are 2 groups in Gomba. We have Kakoma group, we trained them yesterday, value addition. Also we have Chifamba group, also we trained them value addition yesterday.
Peusa, Nezico Kalima, Peusa, CBS Peusa. I have planted banana fiber, cassava, coffee, And the other things, which is maize. My garden is interplanted crops such as cassava, coffee, and banana fibers.
Je yasookanga okutonya abamulina eyamera nadda era gwe tusuubira nti gwe tugenda okuggyako ensigo.
So as we were advised by our coordinator, we raised our dryer on these bricks so that we maintain it safely, and we are so glad that we have managed to collect some fee from maintenance. So we have at least 20,000, which we are deducted per kilo. We deducted at least 100 shillings from those members who come to dry from our dryer. So we are glad and we are thankful to you, Ebafosa. Thank you so much, and we are willing to have other studies from you, other things from you. We are welcoming you every time, every day.
My name is David Luganda, and today we have come at Chifampa, CBS Pewosa Group. We have conducted the value addition training. This training has enabled members to learn some skills. Today we have made porridge, which is cassava porridge. We have mixed a number of flour, which include maize flour, cassava, and other ingredients in order to make this porridge. This porridge is good for babies, for mothers, and also youth who can drink it. It is energizing, and it also makes you healthy in your body. Another training we have had today is the making of bagia, while we are using high quality cassava flour. The cassava flour being used is dried using the solar dryers we gave to these groups, and Chifampa is one of the group which got the solar dryer in Gomba County. So this is a systems approach whereby farmers are using ecosystem-based adaptation approaches, having given them cassava cuttings of Nalcas 1 from which they planted, and also Chifampa members planted, and other members of Pewosa in Gomba planted. So after EBA, they are drying that cassava using the solar dryer we gave them, and you have seen the drying center, and now they are adding value. The essence of this is to add on savings, to increase on their production of value-added products, and also promoting cassava agro-industrialization in Uganda. Thank you very much, Chifampa, for this, and also Ebafosa for providing these activities. And also we are going to go to other areas in Uganda and also other village saving loans association, so that we can do the same with the CBS Pewosa Cooperative in the Buganda Kingdom. Thank you very much. Today we have come to Kakoma Women and Men Group. This is a group located in Gomba district, and it's serving with CBS Pewosa Cooperative. We gave out over 40 acres of cassava cuttings to this region, and this group specifically planted 5 acres of cassava. acres planted. We train them on ecosystem-based adaptation approaches. We train them on how to keep this cassava and also disseminate the cassava cuttings to other members of the group and also other village saving allowance association. Some of the ecosystem-based adaptations trained to the members were intercropping cassava with cowpeas, with beans, with maize. But this group chose cowpeas, whereby this has enabled them to harvest over 100 kilograms from this garden. We made sure that we trained them on how to plant. That if you see what is here, what they planted, this is a plant, and also this is a plant. So the meters 3 by 4, it has enabled this to catch up. If you see the soil here, it's a bit wet, but if you see where this has not happened, it's a bit dry and the soil is dry. So in the 7 to 8 months, the whole garden is going to catch a bit like a small forest, whereby the sun can't penetrate to the soil so that the water can evaporate, and this will enable this cassava garden to look green, and also to reduce on the cost of weeding, because they are going to weed. They have weeded only 2 times and they will not weed anymore. The next time maybe they will just picking a few weeds around in the garden. You have also trained them on how to prune the cassava, because if the cassava, due to the EB approach of using organic manure, the forest has cut earlier, and also the branches are many. So when you reduce on the branches, this enables the roots to remain with the food to eat enough, because the cassava will not feed in this other part. So you have pruned, and it is not time for the canipo to catch, also the small forest of the cassava to catch in the garden. So we have trained a number of activities. Remember, this group has a solar dryer. This cassava is going to be dried using the solar dryer. They have been having a challenge of having enough of cassava. The cassava has not been enough, and since they have their 5 acres, this is going to be a rapid drying using a solar dryer. The cassava they are sourcing is from their individual gardens, and most of the cassava is dried. And also the cassava cuttings, which are going to be got from this garden, they are going to be given out to other members in the group to also plant on their individual farms, and also give other village saving allowance association. This is going to be a systems approach, and also the solar dryers, using the solar dryer to dry in order to reduce the post-harvest losses which happen during harvesting until the market pack. We have also looked, if I show you one of the leaves of this cassava, it's very quite good, looking green. We have moved around the garden. We have not seen any signs of brown stroke disease, of cassava mosaic, meaning one of the ecosystem-based adaptation approach trained to these people, the group of Kakoma, was planting quality cassava cuttings which are free from the disease, good, early maturing, and also drought resistant. This place is in nearing a cattle corridor. The sunshine is hot, but you see everything is green due to the EB approaches we have taught to this community.
My name is Sevunya Fred. A member of CBS Peosa Kakoma. As a group, we've managed to plant this cassava plantation, so we are glad that it has shown us enough example of which we were told by the coordinators of Bafosa. So we managed to plant cowpeas from this garden of cassava, and today we have learned about pruning, and we've pruned our cassava. We are glad that this cassava is of a good variety which is disease free, So we thank Ebafosa.
Work on a small plot of land, enabling him to plant coffee and also cassava. This is one of the ecosystem-based adaptation approaches we told him so that he can conduct. That even if you don't have a bigger piece of land, it is better to make sure that he can use this very well. So, having done this as an individual, as one of the team leader, he has inspired other members to also plant their cassava. This is a group of 60 members who are using the solar dryer, but 30 of them are the ones who have benefited from this, and others are implementing the EBA on their individual gardens. So, this is cassava, having coffee behind me, and also the members, this means that at least farmers are adapting to the existing climate change impacts, and also they are implementing what we are telling them, and we see the coffee has also put on. The coffee cherries are on, and also the cassava is remaining a few months so that he can also give the cuttings to other members. Thanks Ebafosa, and thanks to Kakoma Village Saving Alonso Association for also conducting this EBA approach. Thank you very much.
My name is Sebunya Fred, a member of CBS Pewosa Kakoma. We are glad to receive you, and we are happy with our solar dryer. So we have seen a difference between cassava which has been dried on the ground and this which we are drying from the dryer. So we are happy. We have a challenge of having a little of the cassava, but with what we received from Ebafosa, we assume that in the coming days or months, we shall receive enough cassava to dry in our dryer, and we planted those trees and we have the plenty of gardens. So we hope we shall receive more cassava to dry in our dryer.
So in the previous season, do members still have the cassava in their gardens?
They have, but they don't have much. So we hope we are going to add on more from what we received from Ebafosa, because we received the cassava trees. Yeah.
So how has according to the village, observing this solar dryer being in this place, how have they seen it as a community? Because you are the only group in this region having this solar dryer. So according to you,
they are very happy, and they are willing to use it to accommodate good wealth, because they receive good cassava from it and they are willing to use it.
How many so far kilograms have you dried in this solar dryer?
As I told you before, cassava has been little, but now we have managed to dry at least like 150 kg from our dryer, and we assume by the end of June, because we are ready to look for another cassava and we dry in our dryer. So apart from that kilograms I have told you, we assume we can double it and we upgrade our outcome from the dryer.
So I'm seeing a fence on a dryer. Maybe you can hold on it. We can go there and hold on it. What is the use of this fence perimeter wall you made?
The committee of the dryer put this fence in order to protect our fence, to protect our dryer, so that it can be protected and it is not destroyed by the children.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how many members are in this group, and how many members are willing to be using this dryer?
As a group, we are about 60, but at least 45 of us, we are willing to use it.
And they are using it?
Yeah.
Okay. So what challenges have you been facing before receiving this dryer, mainly when you are drying food?
The challenges are very many. First of all, we were drying our food from the ground. During rainy season, the food may rot. After rotting, and the food becomes very dirty. But right now, we are overcoming that problem by using our dryer. The dryer gives us clean food, thus having good health.
So another issue, how is the community? Is the community willing to also come and use the dryer, or have they started also using the dryer? Mainly the community, not members of the group.
I see. They have started, but the problem is they may have some food to dry in it, but when we tell them to pay some fee of maintenance, some may abandon, but they have picked and they have started paying some fee for maintenance, and they are willing to use it.
Thank you very much.
This is what innovative volunteerism stands for. This is impact. This is action. This is inspiration. This is what we must do, because every little action we undertake matters. Climate action is our own fierce urgency of now, and every action we take to help a mother put food on the table and more money in more pockets matters. That's what innovative volunteerism is all about. Ushering and inspiring young people to become solution providers, to turn climate change challenges into opportunities. That's what we are seeing, and that's impact. That's climate action, and we must.
Or climate scientists, rather, have warned that the flooding in KwaZulu-Natal is just the start of many more extreme weather events to come. Africa Regional Climate Change Coordinator at the UN Environment Programme, Dr. Richard Munang, says the message for Africa is simple. Increasing action is an urgent imperative. Dr. Munang joins us now further to discuss the implications of climate change for the continent that contributes the least to all of this. Thank you very much for availing yourself this morning. How should we understand the events that we are seeing, not just in South Africa, Mozambique, Madagascar, Malawi?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. The reality of climate change is actually with us, and this is no longer an abstract issue. And with the latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Assessment Report, called the SIC Assessment Report, it clearly shows that we are almost just 20 years away from hitting 1.5 degrees, and that even though that is the case, Africa is warming faster than the rest of the world. And when you look at the events that are happening in Southern African region, is actually attributed to the changing climate, because what the reports have been saying or telling us consistently are that with warming, we are going to have more floods, we are going to have more extreme events of droughts, and these are just the manifestations of what we are going to see in the long run. And these are the biophysical sides, but there is also the other side, which is the socio-economic side, because when the floods come, they displace people, they destroy infrastructure, but people are more vulnerable to this because they are not able to move to areas in which they are supposed to be in, because they lack the resources that are needed. And that socio-economic dimension is actually what is exacerbating this vulnerability that we are seeing today in the continent.
Doc, where are we drawing our research from? I guess I ask in light of a report that was done by Carbon Brief. You can go online to access it. And the study looked at 100 of the most highly cited climate research papers over the past 5 years. Fewer than 1% of the authors were based on the continent. It speaks of systematic bias, where one study noted that a lot of the understanding of climate change is biased towards cooler climates because it's mainly carried out by scientists who live in the global north in cold climates.
The reality is that science doesn't know black and white. Science is science, and the world is an interconnected space. And Africa is part of the global community, where the latest science that has stated came from. It's a United Nations report called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that brings scientists from across the entire world, including from in Africa. The fact that very little research has been done in Africa doesn't necessarily mean that there is no research that has been done about Africa. And the science has been quite very, very consistent. Actually, I did my PhD 11 years ago on climate change and Africa. And actually, from the data then, it corroborates with the data that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is actually bringing out. But I think the bigger question should be, with what we know, even if you look at what our mothers in communities have been telling us, the amount of rain that they used to have 10 years ago has changed. There are more droughts today than there were in 1950 and 1960. So this anecdotal information is actually telling enough that we are seeing the changing climate from the experiences that we have had before and the experiences that we're having today. So that means we must take action to be able to reverse these challenging moments in which we are living in today.
What action do we take when we contribute the least to the problem?
The reality is, when your house is on fire, you have to put it out. And to do so, Africa has contributed the least, as you've rightly said, just roughly 2 to 3% of global emissions, but it is the most vulnerable because of low socioeconomic base. Very few people have the opportunity to put food on the table. Very few people have the opportunity to put more money in more pockets. What needs to be done, it needs to be done from three perspectives. Firstly, we must appreciate African governments for being the biggest continent in the entire globe that have ratified what is called the Paris Climate Change Agreement and put together plans called nationally determined contributions. 52 out of 54 countries have done so, and they have also increased the ambition more than any other part of the world. That's one. Two is, we now need to turn these policies into reality that can make meaningful change in the common person's life across every community in a continent. And for that to happen, there needs to be investments in actions, especially the agro value chain. 60% of people in the continent are employed in the entire agro sector. But how can we be able then to leverage simple solutions in communities, like adding value to dry vegetables, to dry their corn, what we call simple climate action solar dryers that young people can be engaged to produce, and they need incentives. And these incentives need to be given in terms of tax incentives or in terms of financial incentives, which governments are already doing, but that's not enough. But these incentives need to be channeled through structures that are accessible to the informal sector, like communal cooperatives, where young people can then be able to access financial opportunities and also get the requisite training to then be able to tap into these opportunities as they address the challenges that are found within communities. And the last one is, climate change needs to become part and parcel of the educational curriculum. It needs to be taught in school not just as a problem, but as a business opportunity. Because we're speaking today, in the entire African continent, about 90% of the population depends on charcoal. And this charcoal is not only causing indoor pollution that is killing over 700,000 Africans each and every year, but it's also an opportunity that can be tapped into because it presents a market of $20 billion. And so if just training young people to turn agricultural waste into fuel briquettes will be creating an opportunity that is a business investment opportunity, but at the same time reducing the indoor pollution. So making this become part and parcel of the educational curriculum and make this part of national development will turn climate challenges into opportunities.
Absolutely, Doc. I guess the question on, how the research is conducted, I think there's a saying about anything about us without us. There's something that is not right there, and I guess that then leads to this question of indigenous knowledge systems that have existed on the continent for eons. How are we tapping into that, to mitigate some of these climate change factors?
You can only be able to address any challenge by building on what works in the areas in which that problem is happening. What do I mean by this? Indigenous knowledge must become part and parcel of how climate resilience of communities is being built. And if you look across the continent, if I take just western part of Africa, there is an indigenous knowledge called Zai, which is a very simple technique that communities have used to dig holes when it rains. It captures the water and then rejuvenate the water retention capability, and this has resulted in agricultural use up to 500%. If that is not built on, there is absolutely no way in the Sahel that agricultural production can be increased. It is the same in other communities across the entire African continent. So the point then is indigenous knowledge must become part and parcel of how climate resilience development can be fostered across the entire continent. But more importantly is the fact that the climate is changing across the continent today doesn't mean that communities are not taking action. We see our mothers in communities actually using organic manure that is actually produced from the communities in which they live. They are using different agricultural techniques, intercropping, agroforestry. These techniques, they know them, they use them. So the best way is to build on what works. And it's only by also listening to these communities and learning from what they've done that we can be able to foster a transformational climate action for people and planet. So your point is very correct. And indigenous knowledge must take center stage to then be able to move forward. And that means one aspect, we must learn from the communities that are coping with this changing climate and understand their gaps and fill those gaps. Because one aspect is we do not do development for people. People do development for themselves. And what we must always do is to facilitate the process.